A lot of this channel is based off of nostalgia that I have for classic gaming and classic gaming devices that I grew up with. And one in particular that I carry a lot of nostalgia for is the original Xbox. I spent a ton of hours playing Silent Hill 2, Dead or Alive 3, Unreal Championship, and especially games like Halo 2. Those were staples of gaming for me as I was transitioning from a preteen into a teenager. And that console in particular did a lot of great things. It also had a couple weird caveats when it came out. One being that the original Duke controller that they launched the Xbox with, for a lot of people, myself included, wasn't the most comfortable controller. However, Microsoft ended up coming to market with kind of like a refresh of their standard controller, and that controller is called the Controller S. And that was the controller that all those games I just listed, I played a ton of with. And for me, that controller at that time period was something that I was pretty partial to. I preferred it over the PlayStation that I had, or even in some cases the GameCube controller. And it, to me, just felt well-rounded. It felt well coordinated, configured, and it just felt good for all the games that I was playing. So when I saw that Hyperkin was releasing the Controller S, or they call it the DuchesS, when I saw they were releasing a replica for the Xbox Series consoles, I was pretty excited. This is something that I'd been looking at, and when they released, I'd been going back and forth. Am I going to get it? Am I not? And part of it came down to the fact that I have like 50,000 controllers, it feels like, that I've reviewed on this channel that I just generally own. But I decided, you know what? I loved that controller enough, and there's enough nostalgia that I have for it. I want to add it to my collection. So I picked that up, and I've been playtesting it over the past week or so. And in this video, I'm going to go over what I really like about this replica controller from Hyperkin and some of the deficits that come with it. So let's take a look. So to start, I'm not going to say that I have any direct experience with Hyperkin prior to purchasing this controller, so this is kind of a newer brand for me as far as controllers go. As a lot of you guys have seen, I've reviewed PDP, Power A, official Microsoft products, but this is a different brand, so I was definitely a little excited to see how their controller just generally would compare to anything else that's on the market. And when I looked at this online, there were only two options in terms of color. So you could purchase this in black or you could purchase this in white. One of the things I do like is the packaging itself. As you open this box up, you end up seeing like a pretty cool little like almost insert or advertisement covering the controller in regards to when the controller was released in 2004 and to a new dawn in 2024, 2025 as of recording this video. And you open up the packaging and it looks like Hyperkin took a lot of care in making sure that this controller would basically survive anything that's thrown at it in terms of shipping. Adding the little foam covers to the joysticks and everything was a nice touch. Now inside the box, you get obviously, of course, the controller. As you kind of peel back the casing of the box, there is a Hyperkin sticker that's included. There's a manual as well as like a little thank you insert from Hyperkin. And one of the things I do want to emphasize is these controllers are wired and they only come in a wired configuration, which for some people, this may be an issue. For others, maybe not so much. I myself, I game at a computer desk, so for me, having the wired plug-in isn't terrible. It's not as good as being wireless, of course, but it works. And I want to highlight that the pack-in wire that they give you has like a nice fabric mesh on top of it. It feels premium, and I like the touch that they made it nice and white to match the aesthetic of the controller itself. So getting into the actual particulars of the controller, one thing I was curious about is brands like Power A, PDP have their own front end dashboard, so you can configure their controllers, configure their buttons, and play with things like the triggers and the joysticks. There's also a stock application built into the Xbox to do some of that, with controllers as well. I looked on the App Store, I also looked online to see if I was missing something. Hyperkin doesn't appear to have anything like this. To me, it's not a major deficit, but it does limit the customization of the controller, which I'm going to revisit in a moment here. So other than that, setting up the controller, plugging it into the Xbox, pretty straightforward. Obviously, it worked out of the gate. Now, a couple things that I do want to highlight. The controller S, and this looks like a pretty close replica. Unfortunately, my old Xbox is stored away somewhere, so I couldn't fully compare the original controller S to the DuchesS from Hyperkin. But the controller S definitely feels a bit bigger than a standard Xbox controller. So there's definitely a bit more size to this controller. And it definitely, for some people, may feel a little uncomfortable, but in my opinion, I didn't really mind. And I liked the nostalgia I had to kind of holding this. Now, going deeper into the controller, one of the cool things that I like about it is that big Xbox, the original Xbox logo. That's actually your home button or your menu button for the Xbox. So you just press that in and it basically puts you back at the menu. And I thought that was a cool little touch. You also have on this controller the share function built onto the front of the actual controller plate, which obviously was not on the original Xbox. And then of course you have your start and select buttons on the far left, as well as your, I guess you want to call them bumper buttons, or your black and white buttons on the bottom right. Now, one of the things that I was a little concerned about, because I'm going to put it like this, I didn't go too deep into this, but I was worried about how the placement of the bumpers on the top of the controller were going to feel. And I feel like Hyperkin did a good job of placing them in an ergonomic position without making them feel awkward. Because you have to understand there's quite a bit of dead space on this controller due to the fact that you can't insert a memory pack, obviously, into this controller like you could on the original controller S. So your bumper shoulder buttons are kind of recessed downwards, but ergonomically it feels good, as well as the actual triggers themselves also feel good. One thing that I was half concerned about was the controller S, and this was something I recall with the Xbox, the original Xbox, was that the dead zones always felt incredibly tight. And this controller, or Hyperkin, sorry, does a good job of making this controller's dead zones feel appropriate to the controller and appropriate to the games you're playing. So in other words, they feel smooth. They don't feel ultra tight like I felt the original Xbox's dead zones felt, which is a nice touch. And I also like that the rubber on these joysticks is it's just nice and soft. I like the tactile feeling of it, and it mimics the original controller S, the front little four bumps on the front of the joystick. So it feels cool. Now, getting into using this controller. So here's the thing. I did go into purchasing this controller kind of with an intention of what I was going to primarily play using this controller. So for me, nostalgia is a big thing. And I am an Xbox user who plays a lot of classic Xbox games on my Series X. I've played the Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3 HD collection. I'm still playing through Silent Hill 3 again. I started playing Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, and I love the idea of playing a Ninja Gaiden game with the original Xbox. I know Ninja Gaiden 2 was not on the original Xbox, but playing those games using an original Xbox controller, to me, just felt cool. It feels like there's a level of nostalgia there. And it, for the most part, feels good. It works well, it controls well. However, where I start to feel like there's a couple things that this doesn't do as well is I wouldn't primarily use this for a Call of Duty, which seems to be a gold standard of games that I test whenever I get a new controller. But playing like a Call of Duty on this, I find the experience to be substantially more comfortable on my Elite 2 controller, just a regular Xbox controller in general. But using this controller to play some of the classic Xbox games, to me, I find that there's a nice level of nostalgia. And this is what I mean. A game like Call of Duty, I do find I'm constantly pressing the select button. I know this might sound trivial, but I'm constantly pressing the select button to check what my score is whenever I'm playing free-for-all or playing team deathmatch. I'm also finding myself, whenever I play Call of Duty, to me the precision's a huge deal. And while the dead zones on this controller feel good, I wouldn't argue that they're as well suited for a modern shooter like Call of Duty versus my Elite controller. But you also have to understand my Elite controller, I've really tailored to how I game. So there's a level of customization there that you're not going to really get with any other controller anyways, unless you're going into a pro level gaming controller like that. So maybe that's an unfair comparison, but this is my initial impression when playing a Call of Duty versus playing, you know, a game like Ninja Gaiden or Silent Hill 2. So this leads to the next thing. Would I consider this a replacement controller to my main Xbox controllers? Probably not. But would I consider this a cool nostalgia piece for enhancing my experience for classic Xbox games? Absolutely. I like the feel, I like the size of this controller, and I like what it represents and the nostalgia I get using it when it comes to playing classic-ish or classic-style Xbox games. And for me, that's primarily what I'm going to use this for. When I'm going back and revisiting my Silent Hill 2, or even playing Max Payne 2 on Xbox as an Xbox Classic or Original on my Xbox, that's something that I'm going to use this controller for. Now, one of the things though that I disliked about this controller, and to me was a significant enough deficit that I think I should definitely bring up. The black and white buttons just mimic the bumper buttons, which for some people that's fine, some people not so much. My big problem with it though is you can't reassign or customize either of those buttons. So part of me was excited by the fact that I had these two extra face buttons, and I figured maybe I'll be able to assign different functions to them, or kind of add like almost like a little hotkey to them. And unfortunately, that's not something that you can do with this controller. That's not something that I could find in the Xbox options, and as I said, there is no Hyperkin app to customize that. And so for me, that's something that was definitely a bit of a deficit. Something that I myself wish I could have been able to program and properly map. But other than that kind of glaring issue, this controller feels good. The rumble feels good. The joysticks, everything feels good. And I will highlight it has Hall effect joysticks, which I understand for some people is a huge deal, some people not so much. I'm not going to tell you, I'm kind of indifferent. I'm not ultra studied on why that's so much better or not, other than the fact that it prevents stick drift. I just know that the dead zones didn't really seem to be affected, and they also don't seem like they're the most ideal for a shooter like Call of Duty. So ultimately, in my opinion, I would argue this type of controller is for people like me, old guys, who have a level of nostalgia for this era of gaming and want to enhance their experience when it comes to playing Xbox original games or Xbox classic games on their new device. And for me, that's enough to justify the purchase, and for me that's enough to want this in my collection. Now, if you're looking at this as a replacement, you're trying to replace an old Xbox controller or trying to get a better Xbox controller, I think that this isn't necessarily the right way to go about it, and I don't think you'll find that this controller is as well suited for all the modern games that are out there like it is for some of the classic Xbox games. So ultimately, if you have the extra money and this is something that you can see yourself using, like I will be for retro games, I think this is a phenomenal addition, and I think Hyperkin's done a fantastic job of recreating the original Xbox controller S for modern consoles.